Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Leavitt from Ironic Reports. I'm here today with my partner, Jack Sillin, and Jack is a meteorologist. He's actually the meteorologist I first reached out to when I started Ironic, and with just a very dumb idea during the pandemic to kind of shift from going into the concert world and the fact that there was a lot of weddings and weddings were going to be outside. So maybe there was a need for a concierge event meteorologist. And Jack and I were connected. We started a long, I guess it's been 5 years partnership where for the most part, you're behind the scenes. I don't think most of our planners or clients have really talked to you other than the times that I'm in the air or unavailable, or it's the emergency situation where my word is not good enough and you need to come in and be the voice of reason. And this happens to be one of those times where I feel like you are here to be the voice of reason to kind of explain to everyone in our network, personally, through Ironic, throughout, to understand really what happened in Texas. So just want to introduce you and say thank you first for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And unfortunately, it couldn't be under better circumstances. It's obviously a pretty tough event that happened down in Texas recently.
And it's interesting you say that because I think the biggest part of this whole conversation and what I want people to gain from this is we're having the conversation at the point that something has already happened. And I think that is sort of where I want this to go in this direction, is for us to realize that these are conversations that should be had ahead of time. There are plans. We live our life with a lot of risk mitigation. This is one of those things where weather somehow slips through the cracks. And it's happened in the concert industry with the Indiana State Fair. It's obviously happened going back through history, Galveston, Texas. I mean, like with 6,000 people dying from a hurricane. There's points that we as a civilization are populating more locations and are now in places where nature has always been nature. And that then leads us to a section where, yes, it's a once in 100 year, all the lines. This is a once in a lifetime occurrence. This should, has never happened, unprecedented. We're just kind of a small blip in the whole timeline of the world. And the weather has been there since the beginning. So first, I would love if you could just explain to everyone, keeping Texas in mind, but really, what are flash floods? What happened? And from there, sort of how did that really affect what happened in Texas and the terrain and the setup and that made this type of event possible?
Yeah, so at a most basic level, right, a flash flood is just a flood that happens in a flash. That is really the technical way to think about it. It's distinct from other events like a big flood on the Mississippi River, for instance, right, which happens over days, weeks, months. Flash flood happens over the course of seconds and minutes. These waters rise really, really rapidly. So it's a really unique danger. You often don't have a whole lot of time to act, even under the best of circumstances. And most flash floods are driven by thunderstorms. So that's a difference from, a big snowmelt flood, right? Which you might be familiar with if you grew up in the upper Midwest or in the Northeast. Different from a hurricane, right? Which is obviously a very big storm system. A lot of these flash floods happen just from what might seem like an ordinary thunderstorm. And that's also partly why they're so dangerous, because you can go out and look and say, oh, it's raining. Thunderstorms happen all the time in the summer. They happen in all different kinds of places. Just when they happen to sit over the same area for many hours, it can end up dumping enough rain to really change the landscape in a hurry. So that's basically what happened in Texas. We had some thunderstorms. They were enhanced by moisture and some remnant circulation from Tropical Storm Barry, which made landfall in Mexico a few days ago. And that just brought a little extra juice and a little extra spin in the atmosphere. And those two ingredients enabled this thunderstorm to just sit up over Kerr County for many hours overnight into the early morning hours of July 4th. So that ended up producing the flash floods that unfortunately we've heard so much about.
And I know that we've talked about this when you say ingredients. I once heard a meteorologist give it the imminent versus warnings and watches. And the way he described it was, if you're in your house and you walk inside your kitchen and the oven is turned on, there's chocolate chips on the counter, there's flour and all the ingredients, there is a chance that cookies might be on the way. But the other way to think about it is if you walk in your house and you already smell the cookies and you see all the ingredients have already been mixed, that is sort of when you get into that warning, and it is imminent, it is possible, not more than possible, it is likely to happen. And that for me is where I think a lot of people are getting confused. I don't want to say confused, because I think a big thing that we're going to talk about today, which everyone, it's like the elephant in the room, is this blame game. And I want to hold back frustration. I know that we've talked about this before going into this conversation, but a lot of people are blaming NOAA, they're blaming the National Weather Service, they're blaming administrative cuts. So I kind of want to just go into pre-November, the world and the meteorology tools that we have on hand, and the fact that we have been consistently building out one of the best, national meteorology centers and services and alert systems, and everything has kind of been there for years. What is the sort of normal process when all of the indicators show, all of the ingredients are there for making this? And I know we can talk about in Texas in this situation, drier conditions, drought conditions. So it's less likely that the water will hold to the ground, more likely that it will increase water levels. But when all the ingredients are there, what is sort of the basic normal steps that bring this to
Yeah, so there's a process, right, that exists basically for tracking these events from when they're 5 to 7 or even more days out from happening. When they're in that longer lead time, you're totally right. We're focused on the ingredients. So the flour, the sugar, the baking powder, the chocolate chips of the weather world. Just because you have all those ingredients in one place doesn't mean that cookies are gonna happen, but you can't have cookies without having all those ingredients in one place, if that makes sense. So 5 to 7 days out, we're really watching for where those ingredients are coming together, knowing that it's not necessarily a guarantee for something bad to happen, but something bad can't happen if you don't have all those ingredients. And for flash flooding, you need moisture. Obviously, you need some sort of spark to get that moist air to rise through the atmosphere where it cools and condenses into rain. And those are basically the ingredients. You need a little bit of spin, maybe some winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere, so the storms are constantly fed new fuel. If you don't have any wind in the upper levels of the atmosphere, the storms will just kind of burn through their local fuel supply and die out. But all those ingredients you can pick out where they might be coming together several days out, and that's the purview of an entity known as the Weather Prediction Center. You may think that is a very broad term, but it's actually a family of these national centers that are organized under NOAA. And its sort of sister entities are the National Hurricane Center, which you've probably heard of, the Storm Prediction Center, which focuses on severe weather, so that being tornadoes, hail, damaging winds, all that kind of stuff. And the Weather Prediction Center kind of focuses on flooding, especially precipitation, both flash flooding and non-flash flooding. And they also handle winter, so snow forecasts and whatnot. So in that 5 to 7 days out time frame, the Weather Prediction Center is really in charge of handling that, and even inside day 5 down to sort of day 3 or so. And they did a good job. They did a fairly good job, I think, with this event. Most of Texas was highlighted in a slight risk, or level 2 out of 5 for flash flooding, level 2 out of 4 rather for flash flooding. And so the risk was there. It's a technical conversation, right? Could they have issued a moderate risk, or that 3 out of 4 alert level, or should they have issued a high risk, a 4 out of 4 alert? And the thing is, with those risk levels, right, you need to be really sure that something bad's going to happen. You need to know that not only are the flour, sugar, and chocolate chips going to occupy the same room, but there's going to be someone there to stir them together and make them into the thing we're trying to predict. So I don't think they did a bad job. I mean, they highlighted that these ingredients were possible, and this was a localized event, right? It only impacted a few square miles out of anywhere in Texas. This could have happened, and it didn't happen everywhere, right? So that's why they try to save those level 4 out of 4 alerts for events like Hurricane Harvey, right? They issued a high risk 4 out of 4 alert level for much of Southeast Texas, and you'd be very hard pressed to find a part of Southeast Texas that was dry after Harvey, right? Same thing for Helene last fall up in North Carolina, right? Basically every part of that area flooded. And so when you don't have confidence about exactly which county is going to be hardest hit, it's hard to pull the trigger on an alert like that, 3 to 5 days in advance. So that's kind of the Weather Prediction Center angle. Inside day 3, especially inside day 2, that responsibility, kind of a new layer of responsibility gets added. There's still the WPC issuing their outlooks, but you also have the local forecast offices. There are 122 of them, I believe, scattered across the country, and they issue the watches and warnings. So they did issue the office responsible for Kerr County, Texas, is the Austin San Antonio Forecast Office. And they issued a flood watch the day before, so about 1:15 in the afternoon on July 3rd. They issued a flood watch, basically alerting people in the hill country that, hey, conditions are favorable for flash flooding, and you should be alert for any warnings that come down the line if those ingredients actually do materialize in the same time and place later on. So people going into that night, they had several days of Weather Prediction Center outlooks saying, hey, the ingredients might be favorable. I forgive anybody in the public for not looking at the WPC outlooks. This is a product that's designed for meteorologists by meteorologists. But heading into that afternoon, when that flood watch was issued, that is very much intended to give everybody a heads up to say, hey, be weather aware tonight. Things may change. You may be in a position where you're warned about flash flooding, and this is a time to pay attention, especially if you're in a vulnerable area. So that's kind of the passing of the baton from the National Center down to the local forecast office. The local forecast office also issues flash flood warnings. So unlike a watch, the warning is, hey, this is happening right now. You got to do something about it right now. And they issued several flash flood warnings. Now, there are several tiers of flash flood warnings, and this is one of the things that meteorologists are talking a lot about, right? If you're feeling confused by the amount of different products out there that I'm going over, it's understandable, right? I mean, why are there 3 different types of flash flood warnings? Should there only be one type? And there are discussions back and forth on that. But the 3 different tiers of flash flood warnings is just a normal one, which is often used when radar indicates potential for flash flooding. We see a thunderstorm. It's sitting in one area for a long time. It's very likely producing heavy rain. And, this is likely to start producing flash flooding soon, but we haven't observed it quite yet. And so the local office issued one of those flash flood warnings before the river even rose an inch, which is really impressive. So that first sort of alert, late at night, early in the morning, was sent out. And once you get some confirmation from river gauges that, flash flooding isn't just imminent, but it is occurring, then you issue sort of second tier, which is this considerable flash flood warning. And once you get to that layer, it sends off what's known as the Wireless Emergency Alert System, or the WEA. And if you've opted in on your phone, and that's really a key point, if you've opted in on your phone, you will get a very loud screeching. It'll wake you up. It's intended to wake you up. It's why that alert system is only tied to that tier 2 flash flood warning, because we don't want it to wake you up if you don't need to. And that alert went out as well before, a lot of damage was really happening. And then that third tier, which is flash flood emergency, basically means this is going to be a disaster for the areas impacted. And that was issued shortly after some of the early reports came out upstream. So there were good warnings. I mean, that's the thing about this event, right? People say, was it the cuts? Was the office understaffed or anything? This was a good forecast. The warnings were issued before flooding happened. They were timely. They gave people lead time. The office was fully staffed, with one exception that we'll talk about later, but all of the operational forecasters were available. They had weather balloon data. That's been another thing that's talked about. The weather balloon data was part of those warnings being issued so early, because that nearby weather balloon launch from Del Rio, Texas in the evening of July 3rd, let us see that, hey, there was so much moisture loaded in this atmosphere, in this environment. And so, the warnings were issued in a timely manner. That's the big story. And the tragedy is that they did not achieve the intended outcome of protecting lives and properties.
And the way you say that, it really kind of hits home to what we try to provide. And, I word this in a way that when we put our weather reports out, each week. On Thursday, I sent a report out that mentioned flash flooding throughout Texas. And I did that because I went to NOAA sites, I gathered information, I reworked the information in ways that it can be provided in the context of weddings. And that is how I choose to approach all of this data, is to put it in the context of live events. And I think that unlike most people, or like what we do, is that it's the job. Like for meteorologist to meteorologist, the way you describe it, my job is to take this information and look at it in the ways of events. What the alerts that you describe on your phone that go off, I have mine set where I get alerts throughout the entire country from our service. So I'm seeing that there are tornadoes every other night, or risks or watches. There are thunderstorms, there's lightning strikes. There are so many things that happen around the world at any given moment. And I'm proactively taking that information. And as we joked about, right before this call started, I did get an alert that there's, severe weather heading towards Brooklyn. I'm in New Orleans. It's not going to affect me tonight. I got alerts throughout the day that there was flood warnings in New Orleans, and that can affect me. The thing that I think that I really want to stress to the people that we work with and the people that are in our network is the fact that the resources are there, the warnings, the watches, the information. What happens a lot now, it feels like, is that people are looking at it and saying, well, why didn't I know that I should be getting these warnings? Or why didn't I don't have cell reception? Why don't I have a radio? And I'm sitting here in New Orleans at my desk. I have a weather radio in my desk drawer. It has never been turned on, and I have it there because I get the alerts on my phone. But the second that there's a hurricane and my phone goes out and towers are down, I have an option to know what is going to be happening because I will get the information on there. And that's my proactive planning and the risk mitigation of what I need to deal with. The same as the extra battery packs and power chargers and banks that we have. I think that when this came out and the stories dropped, and I will say this so frustratingly, like the TikToks started to roll and people started to look to who to blame, a lot of it came down to why wasn't, or who's at fault? What's this? Is this the Trump budget cuts to NOAA? And we'll talk about the budget cuts in a second, because I think that's a big thing people want to think and talk about, because it's the topic. But it really just, the part that we really want to bring home, or at least I really want to convey, is that the information is generally out there. It's your responsibility to then find that information and know how to handle that. And one of the parts for that is, in a situation like this, and no blame whatsoever, and to the city, the camp, the people people lost their lives. But and the question now is, was there a weather protocol for knowing that there could have been flash flooding? And did counselors and staff understand that? Is that part of the same situation? When I relate this to, a lot of these things didn't exist in the concert industry until you had the Indiana State Fair, and you had the Sugarland concert. Was warnings and watches were given with enough time to evacuate, to pull everyone down off the rigging, and it was not a once in a lifetime wind gust. It was a frontal boundary that had 70 miles hour winds is what was listed in the watch. At 60-mile-an-hour winds came through. The stage was built where there was not enough ballast. The screens were down. The screens caught on like a sail. And in a matter of seconds, 7 people died, 58 were injured, and more were traumatized. And when you go back and look at this, you can say, okay, well, at least an hour away, they knew that there was 60-mile-an-hour winds. And no one reacted because there was too many people not sure how to react, or there was no plan set in place. And that started the Event Safety Alliance. And the only reason I'm here today working on this is because when the Event Safety Alliance started, I wanted to get into the music industry, and I had a fascination with weather safety and all of this. And I was like, oh, this is a great conference to go to, and I'm going to go listen in on what happened there. And they do this debrief. But that changed fundamentally from start to finish the music industry and the live event world on how we do it, because we lost people who were, people rigging, who were up in the roof when this went down. I see a direct relation between the way that summer camps are going to provide information. I know that you and I have said we've both worked at summer camps in Maine, and we've both talked about the emergency systems that they had placed there, and you're consulting. This was way before my time that I was involved in this world. Summer camps are going to change fundamentally moving forward. What I'm hoping is that this is a big enough wake-up call that everyone in the event world, for us and our people, but everyone in the world overall, are going to say, cool, we need to be proactive on how we handle this. And one big part of that is more severe weather patterns are becoming more prevalent. And we can touch on that in a little bit, and more sort of the where we are with climate change. But how do we all kind of take 1 second, and hopefully it's this moment in a conversation when people are listening to this, to realize that this should not be the normal. If there is the warnings or the watches, people are not fatigued. They're not, okay, my phone rang again. And I think that's a big part of it in this world that we live in, that everyone's, disaster fatigue. It's they're hearing one horrible thing after another. And it's like, well, that might not be affecting me. And that's part of what we want to kind of dive into. But before we go too far down this road, I do want to touch on, there's a couple topics that we're going to cover that are let's be honest, politically supercharged right now. I'll speak for myself, and I think I can throw you in this because we've talked long enough about it. We both grew up pretty liberal in the Northeast, and that's an understatement. We're not here to offend, to be in any way disrespectful to whatever people's political views are for 1,000 different reasons. I think that we're going to have a pretty open conversation about some of the things that have happened. And we're not here to blame anyone when it comes to that. We're here just to say that there are clearly budget cuts that have been announced. There's a headline every other week about a new reason or thing that is being cut and how that will affect forecasting. You've probably all heard about it. I started a project about a month ago at this point, talking about some of these budget cuts and how that will impact the weather industry, and have been behind the scenes working with editors and trying to figure out which is the appropriate press release and way to send this out to the world. Now I don't even care about the fact that it's, the news cycle. It's an old news thing, because I was talking about tornadoes in St. Louis and venues closed for the year and how that's going to affect it because they've had trees fall on top of them. This is we're past the wedding industry. We're at a bigger, wider conversation about the future of the safety for everyone in America when it comes to the weather. Everyone's heard the name, the warning coordinator, meteorologist. And what is that role, the role that was not filled? It doesn't, to me, sound like because that role wasn't filled, the warnings and watches didn't go out. It sounds like it's a miscommunication between what happens next. So give us sort of your take on that situation.
Yeah, so the local forecast office that has responsibility over Kirk County, Texas, as we talked about before, is the San Antonio Austin office. And they lost their warning coordination meteorologist to some of the cuts earlier this year. The warning coordination meteorologist is responsible for coordinating with external stakeholders. So, emergency managers, local law enforcement, anybody who has weather risk, really. Summer camps would be very much included in that. And the job of that person is to go out while the skies are clear and there's no danger, and say, hey, you don't have to worry about anything today, but at some point we're going to issue a watch or a warning for your area. And what does that mean for you? Do you have a way of receiving that watch or warning? Do you have a way of receiving that alert if the power is out, if you don't have cell service? And so there's a lot of behind the scenes work that happens when the waters aren't high and when the skies are clear. And so, it's a hard thing to say, right? I mean, in hindsight, if you had that person, could they have had a conversation with some of the folks up in Kirk County and said, hey, this is a flood prone area. This river, the Guadalupe River, has had several quite extreme flooding events before. And you're running a business, whether it's an RV park or a summer camp or campground or whatever else, on the banks of this scenic and beautiful river. And hey, 364 days of the year, it's a beautiful place, and we hope you enjoy the heck out of it. And a couple days every year, you're going to have to be hearing from us and thinking about the weather. And so, it's easy to say in hindsight, right? If you had that person, maybe they could have had some useful conversations. On the other hand, it's a big forecast area. It's not that person's job to call every summer camp, in Central Texas. You never get to everybody, right? I mean, that's the tough part. You try to make a difference by going out and having some of those conversations, but you can't talk to everybody. It's statistically impossible. This does sort of show you the value of having somebody whose job it is to have those conversations, right? Because the weak link here was not in the forecasting or the warning issuance. The warnings happened. It's what happens next. It's the sort of last mile of weather information delivery. Do people get them, and do people know how to take action to protect their lives and property on the basis of those warnings? It's an incredibly difficult task, right? It's a difficult task to get people to, wake up in the middle of the night, pack up all their stuff, and leave what might be their home or their family business or a place that's really important to them before they see the water rising, right? I mean, there's just such a fundamental human instinct to double check, right? And to see it with your own eyes before you take action. But by the time you're seeing it with your own eyes, it might be too late, especially if you have to manage a large evacuation of many people. And so, yeah, I mean, that those conversations are tough. There's not a silver bullet or an easy answer. And this event, unfortunately, shows you just how important it is to make those efforts. So hopefully the San Antonio office can get their warning coordination meteorologist role filled shortly and continue that work.
Well, and I think you describe it really well in a sense. And I'm remembering, I evacuated a 40,000 person festival once with storms that were not coming for 3 hours, and not one person could understand and these people, they were there for fun, they were there for entertainment, they have been looking forward to seeing this artist go on, and they broke down tears, were crying, why are you canceling this, why do we have to evacuate? And then on our end, we were the stakeholder that was responsible for them. So we showed them that, we had to provide a safe environment for them to be in. And we knew that it was imminent. It was not going to be safe in 3 to 4 hours. And we needed to make sure that they were well off the island that we were performing on, because the storm's going to roll through New York anyways. But it's our responsibility to make sure that they were not outside in the field. So when you go through that, it's like, it makes sense that you have these roles, but it kind of goes back to that point of, we really need to work on what is the pre-planning. And I kept on thinking when you were saying this, every wedding planner or event planner who is listening to this right now has gone on site visits, and none of them show up to an event without getting eyes on it first. And there's no way, and if you do, that's a risk you're taking. But last night I was talking with a planner who was flying to Portugal for a site visit, and making a flight all the way from the States to Portugal just to make sure that they have eyes on the venue and know exactly what they can expect and what they need to do and what they need to bring in. The amount of planning that we as a group are so used to dealing with shouldn't make any of this tricky for us to think about planning on the front end. So that's something that I just want to kind of relate everyone to, is the fact that we're used to doing this type of stuff. So again, without going too political, we all are in this world right now where we're seeing all these headlines that satellites that have been working since the 1960s are being cut to stop hurricane data collection. But we are hearing that we might not have the team to fly the plane that goes inside the hurricanes every season, which has been a huge benefit for us. Choosing my words very wisely, but I will also play bad cop and let you play good cop when I say, what I think we're both thinking. It seems like we are losing a lot of the fundamental privileges that we've had for tracking weather, due to the fact that if you stop tracking it, you can't claim, or if you have no new data, you can't claim that there's any climate change based off data and facts. So if you cut a lot of the programs that track climate change, that's beneficial for someone, not me. But in that, we're losing a lot of the forecast capabilities. And I think that there's a larger conversation about, what does that mean for our forecast? And if people who are our clients are hearing this, are they going to say, well, can these guys track the weather anymore? Is there enough available resources? And we've had conversations where, yes, it's available resources to know 5 to 7 days out what things are going to be popping up. When you get to the hurricane level of, do we know if this is going to turn to the right and miss Tampa, or if this is going to go to the south and avoid Tampa? That's a question that in coming months might not be as able to, or easy to, to predict. So where are your thoughts kind of falling right now when it comes to the proposed cuts and things that you're seeing? What are your concerns? Because I think that's what people want to know, is because handful of the people, more than a handful of the people that we work with, live in South Florida. That's a big conversation, is where in hurricane season, we're in the beginning of it. Where is this going to take us kind of in the future, where we're at with NOAA right now, and with, the administration kind of deciding to close a lot of things down?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky conversation, right? A lot of these programs that exist to help monitor the atmosphere, they tell you what's happening. They tell you both, when there's extreme weather and when there's quiet weather, and how things are changing over time. There's no way to fully understand what the atmosphere is doing right now in a way that doesn't expose how it's changing. There are some sort of redundancies built into this system. So, it's not like we're going back to the Stone Age immediately. In terms of weather forecasting, several satellites are in the process of being turned off, but there are others. So it's not like we're going to be totally, kicked back to 1900 when You have to stand on the Galveston beach and count the swells to figure out if you're about to get a devastating hurricane. But you will notice the degradation in forecast quality, especially at the sort of precision level, right? You put it very well that there's not going to be a hurricane that just appears offshore and nobody's ever seen it before. But there might be you think a tropical storm's coming, and it organizes more quickly than expected, and you thought you were going to get a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm that, it's going to be a bad storm, but you can make it through, and all of a sudden you have a 115-mile-an-hour Category 3 hurricane on your doorstep, because nobody could see that it was getting its act together while the sun was down. I mean, one of the biggest satellites that they're talking about turning off is this microwave satellite imagery, which lets you sort of peer under the hood of a developing tropical cyclone and see just how organized is it, right? Because if you just look down with some of the normal visible satellite imagery, you just see the top layer of the storm, right? And it's going to be this big blob of clouds. You don't really know if that big blob of clouds is organized or if it's disheveled. And this microwave imagery helps you sort of peer under the hood a little bit and assess, whether the system is getting its act together. And that's especially useful overnight when you don't have some of those visible satellite cues. So there's a real risk, anytime you have a tropical storm within 50 or 100 miles of the coast, you might not know now, right? And that's just going to make preparation a whole lot more difficult. And there will be stories eventually that come out of people who, didn't think it would be that bad or didn't think that they were being warned, and they're going to be correct. I mean, a lot of this conversation that we're having about the Texas flooding, right? How to get people to react to warnings, how to get people to take the life-saving action that they need to take. We have the luxury of having this conversation because the warnings are good and the forecasts are good. We will not have the luxury of having this conversation if the forecasts aren't good. And flash flooding is another example, right? There's this tool that, integrates rain gauge observations, water level observations, radar observations, satellite observations, and blends it together in this a really unique way to sort of give you a very quick look at where flash flooding risks are rising most quickly. It's called the multi-radar, multi-sensor system, MRMS. That's slated to be decommissioned later this summer. So you may not know that
Yeah.
that these storms are dropping this much rain, unless somebody calls it in. By that point, it might be too late. So, I mean, yeah, there's going to be a real impact. You're going to notice it. You're going to notice it, especially at the sort of precision level, right? Where exactly will this storm go? How strong exactly is it going to be? There's still ways of seeing these things. Meteorologists are going to do our best and to be clever about figuring it out with the tools that we do have. But these programs, they don't cost very much in the grand scheme of the federal budget. The entire Weather Service costs each American about $3.75 a year. This is not, it's a lot of money to you and me. I mean, $1 billion is a lot of money to me, but it's not a lot of money to the federal government. And the return on investment that you get out of this is extraordinarily high. Yeah.
Not to make it a financial conversation, but one of the things I was doing to prepare for this was looking at what NOAA had, which was originally called it was the $1 billion weather climate disaster page. And this page is no longer going to be available. And the reasoning for that is in alignment with evolving priorities, statutory mandates, and staffing changes. NOAA's centers will no longer be issuing this tracker. And it goes back from 1980 to 2024 and then ends. And it is, a map feature that shows where things have been damaged, how much money has been spent to fix, how many lives were lost. It's a real thing that, is no longer going to be there. And I think one of the things that there's a couple points that, you just mentioned, which is in case someone calls it in, then you'll know it's raining. And I think that that's one thing that people don't understand. You're a storm chaser. There's a whole network of people who I did not know about before I got into this and met you first and then met all of your friends at the meteorology conferences that truly love the weather and have spent their lives kind of, involved in it. There are programs out there that allow people to report observations. A lot of those observations then also do come from the Weather Center. There are balloons that we've talked about. There are satellites. There are companies that will take the rain that lands on a Tesla window, and then that gets pushed back into the system. Everyone in the wedding industry will never let me forget that Dark Sky was 10 times better than I could ever be, and they loved it more than they will ever love me. But Dark Sky would allow you to report the weather, and then they were able to figure out, which way the wind is heading and what's going to happen, and let the people 30 miles to the northeast know that they're going to get some rain because I just said that I saw it there. The same way that traffic works for Waze. So there's billions of, I think we talked about it because I said data collection points, but I think the way that we had said it was 6.4 observations or pieces of data that go into the system every day. When you describe it as $3.75, I think we all can say pretty safely that we'd all be willing to pay for that versus other things that are currently being paid for with tax dollars. It does seem like it just doesn't make sense. And then that kind of leads us to the next part, which I kind of want to talk about, which is more of just societal, disaster fatigue, call it, normalcy bias. Like one of the things that I remember hearing when we first started was about the station nightclub fire, which was, the 10-80-10 rule. And it was when the fire broke out in the station nightclub in Rhode Island, you had 10% of the people saw that there was a fire. 80% of people turned around and tried going out the front door because they saw that there was a fire and that then other people were leaving. 10% of the people didn't move. That sort of feels like where we're going with this is that 10% of our country is keeping the updates, getting the alerts, is aware of the problem. They need to then convince the other 80% to make the move. And that goes into that communication that we talk about where it's, are you planning this? Are your alerts set? Are you making sure that you do have the extra, the radio if you know that you're in a place that doesn't have reception? And then the other 10% obviously is just going to be stubborn in their actions. And we've seen that's human nature to not believe it until, it's too late. But I think with the amount of weather disasters, they feel more normal. And that means that they also probably happen at a higher rate. When it comes to climate change, and, we'll call it what it is because we're not afraid to say that it's real. What are you sort of seeing with the trends in weather, with hurricanes, with more storms across the country that people should just start thinking about more?
Yeah, so there are a number of different ways that climate change impacts extreme weather events. One of the most, and I will say there's some weather event types that climate change very clearly has a clearly demonstrable footprint on. And there's some that it doesn't. So tornadoes, severe hail. People have looked for links to how that's changing as the atmosphere warms, and nobody's found, at least that I've seen, any super convincing evidence that that's changing. So I want to start off by saying that, not every single bit of extreme weather is, 10 times worse. There are people who tell you that, and for some events it's true, but not for all kinds of events. Lightning is another example, right? There was plenty of lightning in the 20th century. There's plenty of lightning in the 21st century. The only change is that now it's happening in some places that it didn't used to, right? So if you're talking about lightning in Alaska, that's different. But, right now we're thinking a lot about flooding, and that's one of the extreme event types that has the clearest, fingerprint from climate change. It's one of the basic physical facts about the atmosphere that warmer air can hold more moisture. You know this if you step outside in the summer, it's super humid. You never go outside in the winter and say, wow, it's so humid out, even if there might be rain or snow actively falling or there's fog. Because even if it's as humid as it can be in January, it's just not that much moisture compared to what you have in July. And so as the atmosphere warms up overall, it can hold more moisture. And then when that moisture is forced to rise due to a thunderstorm or a tropical cyclone or any mountains, there's going to be more moisture available to fall out in the form of heavy rain. It's one of the most easily provable impacts of climate change is the floods that you get now are just much bigger than they used to be. You could go into whole, hurricanes are kind of back and forth. I mean, there's an argument that they get stronger. There's also an argument that they might get less frequent in a warming climate. We haven't really observed that yet. There's just all kinds of confounding variables about hurricanes and stuff like that. But flooding rains, absolutely one of the clearest types of extreme events that there's a big climate change marker in.
And just to kind of touch into that, when you describe moisture in the air. The first thing that I keep on thinking about is as I come off of my 48-hour self-ban of TikTok, I then open up to hear about conspiracy theories about cloud seeding and the craziest, most vile comments that you could possibly read on this situation. And there's a whole other talk I want to do on just basic compassion, which doesn't seem to be basic anymore. But start us off with cloud seeding, because that is one conversation from political elected officials to someone in their backyard who has this theory. There has always been a theory that humans are controlling the weather. I joke about this with everyone when they ask me because I don't want to call them an idiot, but I say if we could control the weather, it would be a multi-trillion-dollar business, and I definitely would not be doing weddings. That's my take on it. You work in the you work as well as doing this, but also in the financial sector, where I fully believe that if you could control the weather a way that could affect the stock market, someone would be very happy and they would pay a lot of money for that. Give us a quick run through on your take on cloud seeding and human intervention or manipulation with the weather.
Yeah, sure. So the idea of cloud seeding has been around since basically the 40s and 50s, and the theory goes, to get rain to fall, you need water to condense around some kind of nucleus or instigator particle. Most of the time, in the natural world, this is dust particles, could be smoke, it could be sea salt that gets churned up from the ocean, and then the water evaporates and the salt is left. There's all kinds of stuff floating through the air, bugs. And so the theory goes, if you drop some of these instigator particles into a cloud, maybe it will entice the cloud to produce some water droplets, and then maybe that can rain. And you could imagine, in a drought, people get quite motivated to try to do this. The problem is it doesn't really work very well. If it worked well, you wouldn't see droughts, right? I mean, China has tried this to get more rain in the arid parts of the country where it's trying to grow crops. The United States has tried it in the desert Southwest. We obviously have a big water shortage issue in the desert Southwest and California. So the U.S. has tried to entice the clouds to rain a bit more out in those places. If you want proof it doesn't work, head down to the Hoover Dam and check on the water level at Lake Mead. If we could make it rain more, we would. Yeah, I mean, Dubai and Saudi Arabia, right? They have they have unlimited money functionally. They've tried this because they're arid desert countries and they want it to rain there. They can't do it. If they could do it, it would be a beautiful, lush environment. So nobody can make it rain when the atmosphere doesn't want it to rain. Nobody wants to make it rain more when the atmosphere does want it to rain. And I mean, the other thing, right, is just sort of consider the scale, right? I mean, it's so easy to feel like, humans can control everything about the atmosphere, but, we do control some part of the atmosphere through climate change, right? And that involves, thousands of planes flying 24/7, involves millions of cars driving 24/7. It involves hundreds of thousands of factories and smokestacks running nonstop. And all of that gets you a signal that if you really squint and are very careful, you can find most places, but not always. So, when I hear people talk about cloud seeding, right, and this isn't natural, right? And my response is always, you're right. It's not natural. Like, humans do have a footprint in this, and it's the fact that we've warmed the atmosphere and now it can hold more moisture. And then when it normally rains, it rains more than it used to. So the cloud seeding conversation is often a way of explaining the fact that this feels different than it used to be. And, people are looking for some reason for that. And cloud seeding offers a sort of convenient way of recognizing that things are not fully natural in the way that they used to be without confronting the sad reality that it's the fact that we're emitting carbon in the atmosphere that's making it rain harder than it used to. So yeah, I mean, nobody's doing enough cloud seeding to actually, at the scale that you would need to have an effect. What we are doing at a scale that's having an effect is emitting carbon and warming the atmosphere.
And I think that explanation, in my opinion, was perfect. And I cannot wait to see the comments that you get for that. Just
If
can't.
anybody has questions, reach out. I mean, I'm always happy to try to explain it. because I don't think that, like, I don't begrudge people for understanding that this is not normal and trying to find an explanation. And there are 100 ways of looking at the information we have and arriving at the correct conclusion. And
And
so these are a few ways of trying to do that. But if you want more ways, reach out.
yeah. And well, and that kind of gets me to, what we want to wrap with. I this is going to bring this to a sadder comment. Before we jumped on the call, I think it was 109 deaths in Texas. Still a lot of people missing. By the time I check again, the number of missing will maybe have gone down and the number of deaths could have gone up. It's pretty clear that this was a devastating disaster, but it's also clear that, like, and this is where I'm going to try not to, tear up or just kind of feel awful for the world that we live in right now, that it turns into this, like, news cycle. And it so clearly reminds me of mass shootings, where first you get tragedy, then there's the grief, and there's a lot of people posting about, how can this happen? This is a whole thing. And then you go from that, and the information becomes, this is what happened, this is how it happened. But you feel like you understand, okay, the water raised up, there was more moisture in the air, the ground was dry, it pushed the water faster, there's a lot of tributaries that all lead down, the camp was on the side. And then what should step in is, okay, well, what was the communication process between the meteorologist and the camp in the 6 months before the camp had been there? There was an incident in the 80s. What has changed between the 80s and today? All of these components. And then you get this feeling like, okay, well, we're going to learn from this. And then the next comment or the next video you see is the conspiracy theory, and it's the cloud seeding, and it's the, someone did this on purpose. And those just pop up. And the other day when I decided that I was basically going to take myself off social media for a minute, it was because I couldn't handle seeing those comments. And then you get into, education. The people who want to know the truth, the real truth, the facts, are people like us having this conversation. I called you after I spoke with someone in the industry that was very connected to the to Camp Mystic, and I said, to you, I don't know what that, I'm saying, because I'm giving her information and facts about where my thoughts are on why there's been cuts and why there's more rain, there's more, information. I called you and I basically said, did I have the right conversation? Did I say that this was, more of a communication issue or more of a planning issue? And the fact is that these storms could happen every 100 years. And I've been, yelling on my soapbox for 5 years since I started this, that I think that we've completely missed the mark with climate change. And we're now in this point of like, okay, let's double down on infrastructure. But that's my view. And I'm choosing to do a long format conversation with a professional meteorologist about this than repost or spout off a conspiracy theory online or say what I want about this in that format. And I hope that more people, really take the time to educate themselves. I think we just, as a whole, for humanity, is people like us, I hope, will have more conversations about this and really go into the science behind it, how we can be prepared, how we can potentially, hopefully, get to a point where our administration sees that, we do need to talk about this. I think that there is a long way away with our current administration. And when we get to this point, it's like when the next thing that happens, which again, it might be a hurricane that they were not able to see under the hood because there was a budget cut and the right satellite was not in practice. And I hope that when that happens, it doesn't turn into the situation like with a mass shooting where we all see the obvious answers of, and 1,000 different variations of the obvious answers to stop mass shootings. But we just say it happened again. It's not changing. I hope that we get together when it comes to climate change and we all can say, yes, we want to make sure that we are advocating for the right systems. We are educating ourselves. We are turning out the alarms on our phone on. We are proactively looking more than just at our weather app to figure out what is happening. So that's my kind of final thoughts. And I don't mean to get too emotional about it, but we're in this weird place where let's just call some facts. The world is heated up, more moisture in the air. That's going to lead to rain. And when the rain comes down, we should all act with compassion and really try to educate ourselves on exactly why this is happening. Any last thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody wants to know the truth about why these events happen. It's a complicated world and these are complicated problems, and understanding, what exactly happened and how to make it not happen again it just takes time and effort. And that's really the thing that I want people to focus on. Don't just have these conversations after a tragedy. Don't just have it when the skies are dark and the rain's pouring. You got to have these conversations well ahead of time, you know, when the skies are blue and you don't want to be thinking about it. And if you do go to that effort of understanding your risk and understanding what you can do to mitigate it and signing up for the alerts and everything like that, I mean, you won't find yourself in this kind of situation. I mean, that's the other big thing, right? Is that you know, these things involve some trade-offs on everybody's part. If you set your phone to be alerted when there's a severe weather warning, flood or tornado or otherwise, and you take the requisite action, even if it means getting up at 2:45 in the morning and driving to the nearest high ground, you won't die in a flood. These warnings are good. If you sign up for them, if you have multiple ways of receiving them, even if the power's out and even if the cell service is down, you will protect yourselves and those around you. But it also means that you run the risk of waking up at 2:45 in the morning and getting your family in the car and sitting on top of a dry hill for a couple hours and then going back home to find out that everything's just fine. And guess what? It's a risk that I would rather run that risk than the risk of waking up to 10 feet of water in my house. So that's the only other thing, right? Is just I want to try to ask for a little bit of patience with the fact that not every warning is going to wash your house away. We try very, very hard as meteorologists to minimize the false alarms and to only alert the people who are actually in real danger. But sometimes we're going to issue a warning and your house isn't going to get washed away. And please don't let that tempt you into ignoring them. So have a plan ahead of time, take the protective actions. So when you get the warnings, have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and you can prevent this from happening. But it does mean that you will run the risk of coming back to a dry house. In that case, you know, try to focus on the bright side and be thankful that it wasn't your turn.
Yeah. I very well said, and thank you for being here with us. This is the first time we've ever done this. I hate to say it, we'll probably be doing more of these over the next couple of years, and who knows. But one of the things I just want to mention is a lot of people have asked, how do I help? How do I get involved? Where can I donate money? There's a bunch of different groups. The most painful thing I saw today, and also beautiful, is Becky Navarro, who's a planner that we work with, posted today and realized that there are a handful of planners in the Austin area that can compartmentalize better than most and can execute and handle things. And she's going to start working on some of the memorial services and the funeral services for those who didn't make it through the storm. And I think that if I could say that there's probably a lot of charities to donate to, but knowing that we are all in this world together, I think reaching out and tracking Becky down would be a good starting point. And then I'll also list some of the other charities out there and ways to help. But for everyone here, just please, you know, we're all in this together, and we just need to remember that and look out, advocate for yourself, advocate for those around you, and that's all I can ask. Jack, thank you so much for this. This was a very special thing that I never thought we would be doing or have to do. I thought we'd just be sticking to, is it going to drizzle? You know, do we need a tent? Do we need sidewalls? So this is a big moment for me to be able to share this with you and to just be able to give a lot of the people that we've worked with for years now more insight into the future. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.